Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and very, very warm pre-Christmas greetings from here at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. I suppose it's true to say that most artists, whether they're sculptors, painters, writers, musicians, they often have a sort of guru, a person that they really look up to and have done for many years during their development. In my own case, since the age of about 10 or 11, I've always really loved the improvisations and also the repertoire playing of the great organist of Notre-Dame in Paris from 1955 until his premature death in 1984 at the age of only 59. His name, Pierre Cochereau. Pierre Cochereau and I never actually met in person, but after having spent 11 years, more or less daily, transcribing some of the most famous of his wonderful improvisations at Notre-Dame, inevitably you get to feel quite close to the spirit of a person. Cochereau was born in Chamades, to the east of Paris, in July 1924. He was the only son of a wealthy industrialist who owned 15 shoe factories. Although Cochereau showed definite signs of prodigy as a young musician, his father urged him to study law. He did this briefly, but it lasted less than a year, and then the brilliant 18-year-old Pierre commenced his studies at the Paris Conservatoire. His organ professor, Marcel Dupré, described him as a phenomenon without equal in the history of the French 20th century organ. Cochereau gained prizes in many complementary disciplines: organ, harmony, counterpoint, music history, and composition. Cochereau's first major church position in Paris was at the Church of Saint-Roch, a beautiful 18th century church nestled in by the side of the Louvre. In 1955, he was nominated to the world's most prestigious tribune, Notre-Dame de Paris. It's interesting to note that he didn't actually apply for the position, but his teacher Marcel Dupré called the Archbishop and urged him to appoint his brilliant student. Cochereau inherited the wonderful organ last rebuilt by Karajan in 1868. This is the organ which Louis Vierne had played every Sunday from 1900 until his death at the Console on the 2nd of June 1937. The organ sounded absolutely marvellous. We have some great recordings made by Cochereau in 1957 and 58, but it was actually in quite poor condition. In 1962, Cochereau electrified the organ with a brand new console in the American style, made by the French organ builder Jean Hermann. 8 years later, the organ gained a new and very controversial set of Chamades reeds, which were voiced by Robert Boisseau, and also the mixture work was changed according to the neoclassic ideal, including, rather interestingly, a 32-foot Grand Plein Jeu in the style of Dom Bédos. The symbiosis between the Notre-Dame instrument and Cochereau's incredible genius in the art of improvisation made him absolutely world famous and a household name, just as ubiquitous as Herbert von Karajan, James Galway, or Jean-Pierre Rampal in his day. Yo-Yo Ma, Yuja Wang, Sir Simon Rattle, Gustavo Dudamel in our day. Cochereau loved to live life to the full, and very much in the fast lane. He was always in a hurry, nervously smoking his Gauloises, even in the tribune. But my guess is that that tradition has probably come to an end after the tragic events of the 14th of April 2019. He also loves sipping on his Johnny Walker red whiskey, driving his very fast Citroen CX, and administrating the music conservatories of Le Mans, Nice, and finally Lyon. In 1986, I had just started as assistant organist at Hereford Cathedral in the UK. I'd been absolutely in love with the improvisations of Cochereau since I was a choir boy at Birmingham Cathedral in 1970. Luckily, all of his improvisations at Notre-Dame were recorded from 1968 onwards by his friend and very close confidant, François Carbou. Many of these improvisations are available on the Solstice label, and for me, like many others, they represent an almost daily nourishment. Cochereau never improvised the same piece twice. Sometimes it's impossible to conceive that this music was actually improvised at all. The tradition at Notre-Dame on Christmas Eve was to improvise a huge fresco before the midnight mass. Most often, the theme was a well-known French carol, and on the 24th of December 1968, the maître chose the French carol Venez, Divin, Messie. I'd known this recording for several years, and in September 1986, I started to write it down from a cassette, mainly to learn more about Cochereau's unique and highly developed post-impressionist harmonic style, and also to sharpen up my own oral skills. Little did I know that I was embarking on an 11-year project, transcribing many of his most famous improvisations at Notre-Dame, with the blessing of his family. I got through about 4 different cassette machines and 2 portable CD players, with that endless routine: start, stop, write down 4 or 5 notes, pause, rewind, start, stop, write down another 4 or 5 notes, pause, rewind. I worked out that it took an average of 4 hours to write down 1 minute's music. So you could definitely say this was a labour of love. The 1968 Venez, Divin, Messie shows Cochereau at the peak of his inspirational genius. The form of the improvisation is actually quite unusual, beginning with a huge post-symphonic fresco, a massive crescendo, perhaps somewhat indebted to the prelude from the Suite Opus 5 by his teacher, Maurice Duruflé, but somehow Cochereau pushes the emotional boundaries even further. You can't but marvel at the harmonic richness, the constant ease of modulation, and the incredible way that he leads the listener's ear forward. The music is never static. Also, the transformation of the theme, which is heard in all sorts of permutations. Then follow a set of quite short variations, including an impetuous intermezzo on the mutations, a rambunctiously syncopated variation on the tutti, a tender andante with the theme expressively chanted in the tenor, wrapped up in harmonies which are super saturated with ravishing chromaticisms. Gritty scherzando, again with the mélange creux, with the mutations. A rhythmic fugato on the Plein Jeu. Funny little duo featuring a quirky staccato ostinato on the 16-foot and 4-foot clarinets, offset by the theme stated plainly on the 4-foot and 8-foot flutes. The final toccata begins in a very virtuosic way, low down on the récit tutti, boîte fermée, and builds to an ecstatic statement of the theme. Music is constantly modulating from one harmonic plateau to the next, almost in a Ravelian manner. After the peak, there follows, to my mind, one of the most incredible moments in the whole of Cochereau's recorded history, a long denouement whereby all the tension of the toccata is dispelled through an extremely emotional wind-down. You can't but help think of the end of Richard Strauss's Tod und Verklärung, but with a French, garlic-imbued sensuality. theme is stated for the final time in a calm D major on a solo cornet. The atmosphere is prepared for the beginning of the Mass with 3,000 people crammed in, waiting silently amidst the incense-ridden nave.